Hello, welcome to another episode of Fresh Thinking by Snowden Optiro. My name's Ian Glacken. I'm an executive consultant here at Snowden Optiro in Perth, Western Australia. This is another one of our series on the proposed update to the JORC Code, JORC 2024 or JORC 2025, as you might call it. Today, we're going to tackle the elephant in the room, which is the proposed changes to competent persons and competent persons regulations. Today I'm joined by one of my colleagues, Mike Andrew. Mike's an executive consultant at Snowden Optiro based in Sydney. Now, what's relevant to this conversation is that apart from being a consultant, Mike was the head of resources, the head of resources for a major mid-tier mining company for 7 years. So he had quite a lot of exposure to and experience of the whole competent persons thing. I must admit, I also had that similar role, but many years ago. So I've been a consultant. But we're both involved in signing off and acting as competent persons, and we both have some interesting views on this. What I should say as a disclaimer is that any opinions that Mike and I might voice are our own opinions and not necessarily the opinions of Snowden Optiro or our parent company. Hi, Mike. Welcome.
Hello, Ian. How are you?
Good. I'm good. Thank you. So just before we get into a bit of a discussion, I thought just as I did in the previous podcast, I thought what we would do is summarize the changes without making it too long and too boring. So as I mentioned in the previous episode, the JORC draft, exposure draft was released on the 1st of August. And we have until the 31st of October to provide commentary and changes. And along the way, there's lots of discussions. There'll be discussions all over Australia. There's one in Perth next week and then one in Sydney and so on. What are the changes to the CP or competent persons regulations? One thing I should say is that the parts of the JORC Code that talk about experience, commodity experience, and the length of that experience haven't actually changed. They're pretty well as they were. What has changed, and Mike and I will talk about this, is the requirement for us to, the requirement for CPs, competent persons, to upload what's called a CV of record. Now, this is a resume that's going to be uploaded to a database, which presumably will be in the public domain for everybody. So we'll have a chat about that. The other issue is that in addition to competent persons, we're now having a group of people called specialists. Now, specialists are additional experts who come under the responsibility of the CP, the competent person, but at the same time, they need to have membership of a professional body which has a code of ethics, such as the AusIMM or the AIG. But clearly, if the people are specialists, then they're going to be a member of a different organisation. There's also increased emphasis on the responsibility of companies through the board of directors, that they are taking responsibility for the content of public reports, which has been emphasised and increased from the previous version. And there's also a requirement for a lot more documentation. So before I ask Mike some questions, I just wanted to make a few comments, and there's a few things to say here. One statement that was made, which may or may not have been made by the regulator. When I talk about the regulator, I'm talking about ASIC, the Australian Securities and Investments Commission. And one apocryphal statement was that the Australian mining industry is perhaps the least regulated profession in Australia in terms of professional registration and regulation. We do have professional bodies, we do have regulation, but when you compare the need for CPD, continuing professional development, with, say, accountants, doctors, lawyers, architects, teachers, there's essentially no requirement for continuing professional development. Another issue is that the onus for competent persons is not the responsibility of the JORC committee, it's the responsibility of the professional bodies. And in the Australian mining industry, that is basically the AusIMM, Australian Institute of Mining and Metallurgy, and the AIG, not the requirement, not the responsibility of JORC. And I would just say that talking about this idea of professional development and chartered professional status is that both the AusIMM and the AIG do have what we call chartered status. In the AusIMM, you can become a chartered professional. Under the AIG, you become a registered professional, so RPGO in my case, or CPGO, or whatever. Now, the interesting point about the version of the JORC Code that's being proposed is that this has absolutely no impact on being a competent person. It's out there, but it's not used. Make of that what you will. So, Mike, let's talk about this CV scheme. What in your view, are the pros and cons of this approach?
I think one of the pros will be the fact that it's going to be publicly available, so people will be able to see that experience. I understand that there'll be a pro forma provided to fill in, and that at this stage it will be hosted on the JORC website, is my understanding from reading the code so far. But I would say with CVs, and maybe I don't see as many as I used to now that I'm in the consultancy space, but I always found, and probably guilty myself, that we tend to stretch the truth a little bit. So what concerns me is if whoever hosts, or whatever organisation or platform hosts these CVs, by hosting them, are they then saying or confirming that the CV is valid? Because I think that's a big responsibility. And I would also think too that there may be issues with privacy subject to what is included in that pro forma.
So how do you think, for instance, that we could confirm the validity of a person's CV that's posted on this public platform? How could that be achieved?
Well, I suppose the same way that a competent person's ability is sometimes validated. That if people have any issues with it, if it's AusIMM, you'll be brought before the ethics. I would imagine that there'll be people out there that'll be scrolling through these saying, well, I was at that mine at this time, and I didn't see them, or whatever. So again, it's going to come down to, I think, the competent person that's posting it to take responsibility for the CV, as they currently do for their ability to sign off and have the requisite experience.
So in other words, it's going to be, any issues are going to be reactive rather than proactive. And as with the current version of the JORC Code, it's essentially self-regulation. Is that how you see it? I think that's how I see it.
I think it'll have to be, unless there's some, paid vetting that you might have to do, or introduce people that review and fact check CVs. And how often do people actually fact check a CV these days? If you're applying for a job, you might check one or two references, but how much detailed fact checking goes into a CV, even when you're employing someone directly as a result of that CV? Yeah,
that's an issue. And I guess the other issue is that obviously the JORC Code and the current iteration and the future iteration talks about commodity experience and also the length of that experience. Doesn't really talk about underlying geological experience. I mean, what sort of areas are we talking about that underlie our 5 years in a certain commodity?
I view it as exposure to that commodity. And I suppose, my first job when I was at BHP was exposure to iron ore and industrial minerals through dolomite and limestone. And there was a practical component that you had hands-on experience in terms of mining and the mining aspect and the geological aspect that comes with that. Whether that carries the same weight as if you're coming from, say, maybe a purely academic background, where you understand academically these things and you get involved in modelling, just statistical modelling or whatever, does that carry the same weight? I'm not sure, but again, it comes down to the person as a CP that's being able to be confident that they have the, I think, relevant or experience relevant to the commodity. I think is the change of the wording in the code now, isn't it?
Yeah, but I guess the one of the issues that you and I discussed earlier was this idea that underlying every commodity-based experience, there's a general level of expertise in, say, sampling or QA/QC or analytical techniques, and that's not really mentioned. Do you feel that should be part of any declaration in a CV?
Well, I think it will have to be, because part of the competency is you need to declare that you are familiar with sampling and analytical techniques as well as the commodity. So I would imagine that experience will have to be captured somewhere on that CV form.
Yeah, and I guess if there is a pro forma, as you say, then that probably will be covered. So do you think that people that act as competent persons for multiple commodities and multiple events, do you think that the CV or the resume should be updated every time or just submitted in perpetuity?
Well, I think if you're starting out in the industry, say someone in that 5 to 10 year experience, your CV will change with time as you get more experience and more exposure to different commodities. I don't want to put you on the spot about age, but we've both been kicking around for probably 30 years. Well, in advance of 30 years in the industry, so we've seen a bit. And I think one of the key changes is experience relevant to the commodity. And I think that allows to me, because I see a lot of commodities that have similar characteristics when you're looking at estimating or developing a resource. So I suppose it's having the experience to know that, how to handle aspects that are consistent across different commodities, and feel confident that, all right, I haven't had as much exposure to this commodity, but it is very similar to one I have been. And, I'd be confident in being able to stand up before my peers to defend that and say that I am competent in this.
Right.
So it looks like for now anyway, we've landed on this resume idea. Do you see any alternatives, or is it viable that we just go with the status quo? In other words, self-declaration and self-proclamation as a CV. Do you think that's still viable?
I would have been happy if it remained unchanged, but I think regardless of how you feel, we're all going to be dragged, some willingly, some kicking and screaming, to have to prepare and provide a CV as part of the code updates. To me, I think being a CP over the last 30 odd years or whatever, it hasn't been an issue. I think. I mean, if questioned, I was prepared to provide a defence or justification for my areas of competence. And I don't know whether we need to formalise and become more prescriptive. I don't think that's a guarantee of improved outcomes. That's my view.
Yeah, I take a slightly different view. I mean, talking about this idea of continuing professional development, I take the view that, as I said to you earlier on, we've got these CP, as in Chartered Professional Status for the AusIMM and the AIG. Now, the fact is that, in a hypothetical situation, a person could have left university 40 years ago. They could have worked in the industry. They could have signed off on multiple estimates. But during that time, they would maybe not have gone to a single lecture, done any course, done any training, and they can still sign off. Now, Do you think that's fair, or is that, or does all the experience come through working in the area as opposed to CPD, continuing professional development?
I suppose if that was the case, I'd want to review the AusIMM and AIG entry level requirements to become a member to sign off, to be able to sign off.
Well, the fact is that there's no requirements for CPD whatsoever, and I think that's an issue.
You know, you still got to be able to prove you've got the qualifications and whatever.
Yeah,
I would argue that you can formalise continuous professional development, by attending, doing postgrad, attending presentations or whatever. But there's also the informal development, whereby, it's the old adage: the more rocks you kick, the better the geologist you are. So even though maybe I'm not sure, but if you visit 10 different mines through the year, that to me is worth a lot of experience. Whether that can be captured formally or not, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I think the regulators might see it differently. And again, drawing on this idea that other professional areas like teaching, medicine, architecture, accountancy, they all have requirements for 50 or 100 hours of continuing professional development every year. And I think people, certain organisations, maybe the regulators, see that as part of the process of becoming a competent person or maintaining your status as a competent person.
Yeah, I suppose it's this desire for formalising experience and becoming prescriptive about how we define ourselves as competent people. I suppose I'm of an opinion that it's worked pretty well. There's always going to be exceptions, and even in a regulated environment, I think we'll still continue to have those exceptions.
Yeah, so on that, I guess one of the things from the regulator's point of view that prompted this desire to upgrade the CP status was the so-called mining disasters. I use that word loosely, and this is where investors have lost collectively hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, so do you think that the proposed changes are actually going to eliminate those issues, or do you think they can still occur under any level of regulation?
Well, I think the underlying theme is that if we're reporting resources in accordance with the code, there's no guarantee that they're going to be technically correct. The code outlines a procedure on how to report and undertake the estimate. It's not prescriptive in how the estimate is done. And therefore, I don't think there can ever be a guarantee that there won't be mistakes. And I also look at it in perspective. Okay, so those mining disasters, as they're called, were based around issues, well, supposedly based around issues with the resource that underpinned a mine plan. But, it takes two to tango with that respect. And, some companies mightn't have the technical ability to mine deposits like that. And there's also been some quite substantial losses by big companies, through investment decisions, whether it be poison pill decisions to prevent a takeover or whatever. Yet, I don't see ASIC jumping up and down about those things where, 100 million, hundreds of millions versus billions. So I think there needs to be some perspective. I don't think we will ever eliminate that risk, though I do notice the code is now having the CP to discuss risk and opportunities, which I'm sure all companies that are issuing these releases will be excited about. I think there's still be, there still needs to be clarification to say you can tick all the boxes, report in accordance with the code, but there's still no guarantee that it's going to be a technically correct outcome.
Yeah, I agree. I think the inherent nature of the mining industry, or the geological aspects, are that it is a risky business, and people, I guess, need to realise that. Investors need to realise that. I guess what the code is trying to do is to try and have more discussion, as you say, of the risks and opportunities. It'll be interesting to see how that risk discussion comes out. But look, I tend to agree with you that there's always going to be shysters, people that promote the wrong projects. And there's probably always going to be projects that fail for whatever reason. As you point out, some of those are some of the largest companies in the world, and whose offices surround me as I'm talking. So that's right. So it's going to be interesting to see. But look, I guess my overall view, just to wrap up, is that I think some increased level of regulation in the area of CPs, competent persons, is required because. But people have got away with it. But I guess your view would be that a lot of that it comes through experience in the industry.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see where it goes. I suppose, from my point of view, I'm closer to the end of my professional career than I am to the beginning of it. So, I'll embrace the change, as we all embrace change so willingly these days, but possibly won't have to operate under the new regime for much long once it comes into effect.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks very much for that, Mike. That was a great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you. And that was Fresh Thinking by Snowden Optiro. If you would like to hear more of that, please subscribe to our YouTube channel or wherever you get good podcasts. We do welcome discussion and feedback on these issues because they are, as we realise, controversial. So thank you very much.